And every single day they would send me something like crazier than the previous, whether it be like a straight up like rap song. And then the next day was a song called Death, which is like the heaviest, darkest thing he's ever done, like a new metal thing almost at this point. And then it was like the next day was like Fake Friend, which we took to alternative radio. And it's like we had the like weirdest batch of stuff going on. But again, that was the whole point. And he's like, I want reviewers to be like, I love it all. I don't know what the fuck is happening. I don't know what this artist is doing. And he's like, I love that. I want chaos. And I was like, okay, fuck it. It's all you. You wrote it all. So let's put it out. Let's figure it out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another week on the record process. This week, we invited a good friend of ours to the show, Mr. Johnny Minardi, who is the vice president of A&R at Elektra Music Group. He's had a notable history signing acts like The Band Camino, Grandson, Nothing Nowhere, and Fever 333 in recent years, but has had a wild career that spans back much further than that. Johnny, early on in his career, was responsible for finding and signing bands like The Academy Is, Hidden in Plain View, and Gatsby's American Dream, just to name a few. But recently, Johnny had the opportunity to work with one of his all-time favorite bands on one of their new releases. So we invited him on the show to tell us the story of how Coheed and Cambria got linked up with producer Zakk Cervini to do their most recent record, Vaxis Act 2, A Window of a Waking Mind. So if you've ever been curious about why your favorite bands end up working with the producers that they do from record to record, this conversation shines a lot of light on how that can happen. So here it is, after a quick word from our sponsors. When the world shut down in 2020, musicians and producers everywhere were forced to re-examine and reimagine their creative process. Without the possibility of in-person studio collaboration, the future of music production was anything but certain. But as the old saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. And for those professionals who were determined to never compromise on the quality of their audio, the world-class engineers at Audio Movers established that way. By combining the HD streaming of lossless multi-channel audio straight from your DAW with the unique ability to adjust latency and bitrate, Listen To stands as the solution to unlocking global creativity in music production. Its power has been felt on Grammy Award-winning albums and on over 85% of all modern Abbey Road studio sessions. So stop letting your physical location dictate the quality of your work and the projects within your reach. For a free trial, just follow the link in our show notes and use the code PROCESS to receive 10% off the first year of your membership. Listen, if you're an artist or musician still struggling to find a better way to distribute and promote your music, and you haven't checked out DistroKid yet, then that needs to jump straight to the top of your to-do list. We are proud to have them back with us for another season of the record process, primarily because they, just like us, are committed to empowering and supporting independent artists like you. DistroKid is by far the most affordable service for distributing your music to all digital streaming platforms, and it comes with a bunch of tools to help you elevate your career in a ton of crucial ways. DistroKid not only allows you to spread your music across the streaming ecosystem, regardless of what platform might be top of your focus right now, but it also helps you share your story with labels using their unique upstream tool. You can engage with your fan base using DistroKid's text messaging feature, and they'll even help you create unique lyric videos that can help you promote your music better online. As a Record Process listener, you can get 30% off of your first year's membership just by heading to the show notes and signing up using our affiliate link there. And remember, we always love hearing what you're working on and how tools like DistroKid are helping you create some incredible moments for your fan base. So please don't hesitate to share them with us. And now, here's our interview. Johnny Minardi, welcome to the Record Process. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me. Psyched to dive into it.
Yes, we've been looking forward to this one very much, as you know, and I have mentioned to you in chatting about which stories to kind of focus in on for this one, because you have had an interesting and exciting career. Kind of doesn't really sum it up. You've seen a lot of really important and really powerful records from a really unique angle, both being friends with bands like that and then living on kind of the label end of things as well. And I think that's why Tom and I were so excited to have you on. And the hardest part, as we were just talking about before we jumped on here, was deciding which record to kind of zero in on, because you have so many and there's a lot of good stories. And I think we did it, but maybe it just means we got to have a part 2 at some point if we really feel
sure.
like there's more to overturn at the end of it. So no harm in that, but we'll see how this goes. And first and foremost, I guess we'll start with the record that is most top of mind because it just dropped, is the new Coheed and Cambria record, Vaxis Act 2. And I'm going to make sure, because I don't want to butcher the title, A Window of a Waking Mind. And I love it. I got to pay respect to it because I know thought is there, and Coheed fans will be like, oh, you idiot.
Yeah, you didn't even pay attention. Now that's everything with them's delicate. You got to like really read from the script for that.
Totally. And actually what a great way to kind of segue into what I think is probably so unique about working with a band like that, right? Is they are so thought out, so methodical, so story driven. I mean, the band has such a catalog already and such a unique fan base. Where do you even start the conversation with a band like that around a new record from your perspective? I'm really curious.
Well, in my experience, you do it very accidentally, which is a fun way to fall ass backwards into a record of a band that you love. So working at Roadrunner Records, I did not sign the band. I had never worked with the band. I had just been a fan of the band for 20 years. And the manager and I became friendly just in general while they were at the label, again, that I worked at, but I didn't ever work directly on the project. And he kind of randomly maybe found out, maybe I asked about him or something when the new record was coming or whatever. And he played me a song or two because he didn't realize how big of a fan I was of the whole history. And then I think he sent me Beautiful Losers was the first song, which is the first song on the album. And I immediately was like super excited, freaked out about like how great lyrically, the chorus, every piece of it was. I was like, oh, this is going to be an unbelievable record. And he was just like, oh, cool. Well, what do you think of like, the song? And like, he asked me more details. Right. And I gave him my honest thoughts as a Coheed fan. It was a little longer initially. It was a little, whatever. I gave him very honest feedback and I just told him that. And then the next day he's like, hey, Claudio loved the feedback. And I was like, what do you mean? And I was like, why would you tell Claudio that stuff? I was literally just like talking to you, and I've never met Claudio. He doesn't know who I am, vice versa. Right. And so then he's like, I want to link you guys. I think this would be a really interesting conversation. I said, okay. And again, I don't work with the band. So I'm like, sure, I work at the label, whatever. I get on the phone with Claudio and I fanboy. Like I go, before we get into this song or whatever, I go through the history with them. And I'm like, this is when I first heard of your band. I've seen you this many times. I used to work at Equal Vision. You started there, all these different pieces. So what I found is how like passionate and open and excited he is about music. And obviously he's a genius, but like one-on-one, like this dude doesn't owe me a conversation. And he was just like, I thought it was like a really interesting take on what you thought on the song. And I'd love to kind of hear more of what you think about it. And I was like, okay. So I kept like talking about it. And I said, well, what's your goal with the record? Like, what do you want to happen? And he was kind of explaining like, again, they've been a band for 20 plus years. So he's just like, I just kind of want to keep always like pushing the envelope and finding ways to like have everyone be happy and excited, but also like continue to expand, like there's a lot of depth here. And I kind of just, we went back and forth. So then again, he then took my notes and then came back with that song like the next day with my notes implemented. And he's like, that was awesome. Here's the next song. And I was like, okay.
Classic type A. I did it all. I reworked it. You did what?
Yeah. And he's like, and I liked all of it. I liked all the things you said. I was like, okay, cool. Well, now I like the song more as a fan. So that's cool. Kind of win-win, right? I guess. And then again, he sent the second song, which was Comatose. And I was like, oh my God, and it's like a really riffy song. And I was like, this is crazy. And I gave him like similar feedback, right? Of like what I thought. And again, right away, next day, he's like, I changed the demo. This is what it is. Like, again, these are minor changes. The songs were unbelievable, but it was like, I don't know. The bridge is like 45 seconds. I don't know if we need like, you kind of made your point in the first 15, like maybe it can keep it concise. And he was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, and along the way, I kind of realized that he was saying like, no one's really given me that kind of feedback because it never came from a full on like being obsessed with the band's catalog. And honestly, like the other thing he said that I thought was really interesting now getting to know him, he's like, everyone's always been so intimidated to me to tell me what I should be doing with or like what they feel about what I'm doing. They're always just like, that's Coheed, let's put it out. And he's like, and I was like, that's an interesting thing. He's like, so I really appreciate you being honest. I was like, well, I didn't know you were going to know what I said. So it's kind of a like very interesting approach. I don't know if I would have been honest with him, to be honest with you,
You kind of had to rip that entry point, that like foot and mouth point of like, well, now that you know this, I guess we've gotten past that.
Yep.
And there's a bit of candor. Dude, that is amazing. And also, I just want to, whenever I hear stuff like that just makes me smile and is such a cool, interesting kind of come about story of like two people getting into that kind of collaborative, like back and forth jam session on stuff. I think, and this is part of the reason, Johnny, that I was so excited to have our audience and everybody hear you talk about your perspective in interacting with these bands that, yeah, a lot of times, like some of them are like, yo, they are this incredible, they're their own like unit, they're on their own level as a band, like, right. And Coheed is definitely one of those bands. And I think so many people, and I'm sure like you can laugh about this and everybody does, but a lot of people are like, well, labels are like who ruin bands and A&R, it's like all the negative stigma stuff of like Mr. A&R suit. And it's so funny because every time somebody like says that or uses that like modern cliche trope or like references it, I'm just like, if you only knew people that I know that are actually working in those roles, it's so not the opposite. And this is the exact example. It's like the people out there that I think are really doing that and fulfilling that, at least that I've seen from like even just Wonder Years Journey and other bands, it's like they're people that are at their core, they're going from a fan approach. They're just like, you can only do that and only break that down because you're like, hey, honestly, I love your band. I literally, I'm gonna kind of stand out on you for about 10 minutes. And if you're not completely scared away, I think you'll know that I'm coming from like a place of genuine honesty, not trying to be like, how can Coheed's newest records sell the most, whatever, any of that. And I love that, dude. I love that so much.
Just for all the listeners, because we don't release the video, Johnny is not in a suit. So t-shirt all day.
It's a casual Friday.
Yeah, casual Friday. Kind of a follow-up question. So like, is that a typical relationship of A&R to an artist of like that's very intimate?
Somewhat. Yeah, but like thankfully for me, the person who signed him, the Roadrunner, was Dave Rath, who was the president of Roadrunner. And the second that like I was like, hey, Claudio just called me, and I had to like explain it. A lot of people in his position might have been like, dude, like I make those records. I signed. Like he was like, I love this. This is what a different approach to making a Coheed album. This deep into a career, like it feels like you're the most perfect person suited for it, especially within this company. Why don't you just go for it? And then like, I'm here, right? If you need me, tap me, I'm around. So luckily I got like the full on like support and confidence from one of my bosses and mentors that brought the band in general. So it kind of was this like really great launching point. But, to your point, yeah, a lot of the records I make are like that. Like absolutely every record starts with a conversation of what's the goal on this one, right? Whether it's, I fell in love with your band because of X, but what are you now? You've grown that, and you could speak about that obviously from growing record to record, and you're not 17 in a basement anymore. You have like different things and experiences you're putting into albums. Obviously with them, it's more intricate because it's multiple storylines weaving. And, I kept using the example of like, the thing that's most exciting, I think it was on my first phone call. So as you said, Casey, like I did the Stan thing to where he was either going to be like, you're out of your fucking mind. Right. I don't want to work with you or not. I was like, to me, Coheed is like the musical Star Wars, to where if we could get you, this is like the new run of the Star Wars movies, the last three, right? Where if we get it right, you will hit the young new audience that wasn't around for the first couple records and all the big moments that the band has had. But what they'll do is realize the story underneath, and then they'll go backwards and they'll literally have this fandom forever. Like there's so much Coheed stuff with comic books, with all the other pieces and the visual stuff. That's all these extensions of the worlds they've created. And to me, I was like, this is a lot of pressure. I was like, but I think the way to get more people in is just to put out the best record you can. And like, that's your Star Wars moment. And he was just like, holy shit, that's it. Like, I was like, yes, this is the end. This is the gateway to all of the history. And again, the amount of people that have hit me up about this album, like old friends that haven't kept up with the band and fully admitted that the last 10, 12, 15 years, they didn't even know the band was still putting out music or something. They've been like, I can't stop. Like this record is so impactful. It feels like they're like so excited, and I follow the story. Finally, I kind of got lost along the way or in the middle of their career, and kind of was like, this is a lot of work. I'm just going to listen to bands that I'll go back to the early shit that I like. And they're very conscious of that, by the way, too. So there's this, it wasn't an off topic thing for me to go into.
It is, and that is the challenge, especially with such a legacy act like that, right? So at this point in your career, you've seen a bunch of bands, you grew up on those bands, right? And now it's like I have conversations like this with, Eric at Hopeless and lots of people in those positions that are starting to see and go after, and bands are looking to either reinvent themselves or figuring out where the next phase of or next decade of an already really extensive career is going to look like. And that's a completely different nut to crack than trying to break a band or start from scratch and build a whole new world. And I'm one of those people that hit you up, I think, because I heard the record and it popped up, and then I saw you post about it. It's like, shit, that's right. Like they Roadrunner signed him, and I had seen you post a few things, and I was like, man, I just like pressed repeat on like the first couple songs on this record, or I think it was like just one of the singles that popped up. Yeah. And I was like, man, I immediately did the like nerd dive, like who did the record? Let me go like look at the lyrics, because and that for me, it was that moment where I know about the band. I was never admittedly like, indoctrinated into like the full Coheed, like cosplay world of I know every nuance about it. Right. But I always respected everything that was there, and obviously musically and compositionally. And when I heard that record, I was like, man, if this is like getting me to stop right now, then I know like it's going to get old Coheed fans to stop and get a whole other crop of rock fans and the next generation to acknowledge, and then maybe go do their homework on everything, right? And that's a cool thing. And
that's the key.
And I think that's also a perfect pivot point to talking about what the conversation of, so you were listening to demos, I assume, that you were going back and forth with Claudio on, and they were probably, I would imagine, pretty flushed out demos at that point. It's not like it's not like, hey, I have this melody in this voice recording, voice memo note. So you could get a general idea of it. Where did Zakk come into play, and what was that conversation like? Because that's also, for those that don't know, Zakk Cervini, who they worked with on this record, is on the younger end of, there's a lot of rock, a lot of legendary rock producers, both that they worked with, and a lot of guys that you could choose that I'm sure would be very interested in making this record with them, for a number of reasons, because of their respect for the band. Where did Zakk come into play, and why? What was that conversation like, and how did it go?
I've made a few records with Zakk prior, including Nothing Nowhere, including Fever 333, a handful of stuff, All Time Low, Wake Up Sunshine, a bunch of records with Zakk. And him and I have always just been super good friends. And I knew the fandom he had for not only this era, but for Coheed. So I kind of nerded out with him as I was getting into it in a way, just in passing, or if we saw each other at a show or whatever. And then the second it came time when they were like, well, who should work on this record? We want to like push the envelope. We want to update. We want to do whatever. Right. And I was kind of like, well, I've seen Zakk work, and he works really well remotely. So you guys are in New York, Zakk's in LA. Before you even like start meeting producers, just give me the stems of Beautiful Losers. Cause again, that was the first song we got to a place of like, okay, now we know the structure. We know the kind of like where everything's going to sit. What's your vision for the sound of it? And he kind of gave a little bit of it. And I was like, all right, I'll be back. Give me the stems. Literally like 2 days later, Zakk came back with like a full Zakk production. And cause he was just obsessed. And I sent it back, and Claudia was like, what the fuck just happened? Like, it was like that.
You just met your type A match.
Yeah, I was like, and that's the thing. Those two, like, cut from the same cloth in that regard, where he's like, he dropped everything, was just like, I'm obsessed. This is unbelievable. And went right in. And again, I knew his fandom for the band. So I was like, I think he's going to be the guy that, and again, if it didn't work, no harm, no foul. Thanks for trying. And so he did that. And then again, they started just kind of off, no real like plan or anything. Claudio's like, can I talk to him about like 1 or 2 edits on him? Like, yeah, here. And I just kind of threw him in. And then they started and they finished that song basically, or at least laid it out and had it all mapped out.
Yeah.
And then Claudio was like, can I send you another? And again, he did the same thing that he did to me in a way, where it was like this very genuine, like, he's a fan, but he's also like a very modern, like, envelope pushing producer with his sounds and honestly his speed and all these other things he does. So I think it just kind of started to like line up and click. And it was almost this like little group of like Claudio, Zakk, myself, and the band's manager, Blaze James at Rock Nation. And we were just kind of like, the 4 of us were just sitting in this like little bubble, and like not physically, because it was mid-COVID as well during all this. So we were like kind of just remotely like throwing stuff and on text chains and emails. And then Claudio would update me. Then the next day, Zakk would update us all. And it was like this thing where we're like, are we like making a record right now? Like that was maybe my first like making a record during COVID experience with, again, all I'm doing in that is like facilitating. I'm not like giving any notes. I'm just like out. Like, I'm just like staying out, letting them go. Cause once they started to build, and then I think when I started sending similar notes with each song to Claudio, he started being like, all right, let me just jump ahead on you. And I know what you're going to say about these next 2 now, kind of thing. And we started to kind of learn what it felt like. So with getting Zakk involved that way, then it was like, okay, now it's time to go actually cut. We used some of the stuff from those remote buildings of the songs, but then it was like, I want to cut vocals. I want to get, drums. I want to get everything like out. So we started to bring members out. And it was funny because, again, going to what you said about like the legendary rock producers, and usually you'll book out 2 to 3 months of studio time. Zakk was like, let's book out like 2.5 weeks. And they're like, oh, and then we'll do like, and he's like, that's all we're going to need. And they're like, dude, don't be ridiculous. Like, whatever. Claudio shows up first day. They start ripping through songs. He calls me. He's like, I've never seen anything like this. Like, this dude is editing as I'm recording. He's getting this. Like, he's like, I'm coming out of the booth and he's got the whole thing in. He's playing me the song. And I'm like, I told you, you only needed a few weeks. And it was like this, like, I think it was this amazing, like, updated, like, he's like, oh my God, I didn't know it could like be like this. And again, there's like no quality was sacrificed, no nothing. And they took their time getting everything right. And if they were stuck on a part, they'd really focus. But I mean, this record was, and that's a testament to Claudio and the band. One, knowing what they wanted it to be before they even came in, but also then being as good as they are, and, just coming into the studio and going for it and like really having their shit together. And then it was like Zakk, by the time they left the studio, Zakk was already like halfway through mixing the album.
I believe it. I'd probably further, honestly. If you would actually like ask him to boil it down. Dude, that is so effectively, and I love how you kind of positioned it, where it's like, even though it's like you're not in the process in a linear sense once that's going, but you have kind of built out this like trust tree that they came into to be like, we're all like Coheed, Claudio himself, obviously, you, Zakk, Dave. It's like we're all like in the club, like we're all like card carrying members of the Coheed like club. We love it so much. So that makes it easy for the band to be like, cool. Like, I know that you maybe even more so than me don't want to fuck this up, because it means so much to you. And that's, I think sometimes, is the biggest factor. Trust is clearly like a pillar that in whatever perspective we're talking about on this, it's like, it's all there. And in that way, you started that cycle by that conversation, that thing that slipped through the cracks. And he was like, wait a second, there's somebody over here that like really deeply cares, and not even as like, the role that they're going to play. That's how much they care. I love that. And that, I think, made that marriage come together that otherwise, I mean, maybe it would have, but it certainly wouldn't have happened in the way it did. And especially like a pandemic, like if you weren't, maybe you could be like, cool, let's have lunch. Let's meet. Let's see if we vibe. Right. Instead, it was just like, hey, will you trust me enough to like go send these stems to him. You know what I mean?
Else. Yeah, someone
like,
you don't know
right,
at all.
And that was it. And that was the spark. I love that, dude. What a cool story, and the way things came together. And that album, I mean, speaks for it. The way you can, you see it all coming together, and you can feel the excitement that they were all like feeling and vibing in the room remotely, flying back and forth. And the record just stands like that. It hits, it has depth, it has everything that, yes, I think you would probably, sounds like, be the first to agree that a great Coheed record should have, right?
That was the hope, and kind of the whole point was like, there's something for everyone throughout the history, but there's also stuff for people that have fell off, or there's people that don't even know who the band is, or whatever it may be. There's a piece for everyone, and but it's cohesive. And I remember sitting in the studio at the end. I came in like the last couple of days right after they had finished a bunch of it, and it was kind of getting mixed. And there's a great song on there called The Disappearing Act, which definitely has like a big like dance beat. It's like crazy different, but kind of not. And like, they were definitely like, I don't know, like, is this too? And me and Zakk were like, we looked at each other literally in front of them. And I was like, I'm a huge Coheed fan and I love that song. Zakk's a huge Coheed fan. He loves that song. So what else do you need? And they were kind of like, fuck.
You got two right here if you want a focus group quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, we love it. Like, we wouldn't have wanted to push that song through and whatever. And now it's become like one of the biggest streaming songs on the record. So it's like, clearly it's resonating, and it's like, but it's really funny because like, I don't want to say nervousness, but there's definitely always a like, you kind of rely on what you know, right? And what you're really good at and what your fans react to. So, but it was like, dude, you're a genius writer and musician and like all of this, like you could do anything. And by the way, it sounds like you because it's you. Like, not only is it your voice, but it's your style and it's still your lyric. And there's this energy to it that fits in between the heaviest and the craziest song in the record. Like, it still works. Like, no one's skipping that song when they listen to the record. So I'm thankful that it did what it did, because otherwise all that whole speech in the studio would have been terrible.
Yeah, we can say this and feel like you called your shot the whole time. But yes, there's always the like, you got to trust not only each other, but like kind of your gut instinct, right?
Yeah, and they loved that song, which is why they recorded it. Like, I'm not saying anything about it, but there was definitely at the end when it was like, whoa, this came out like way like, whoa, like big thumping club beat in there, which is super cool. Cause I was like, dude, I think your fans are going to like fucking freak. So like, go for it.
Dude, it does such a cool thing for the brand. And that's also too, it's like how like a band like that like has so much talent and has so much inherent like musical genius and like, foresight. It's like, I think the part of that is an expectation of how are they going to push? What wall are they going to push out a little bit? Mm-hmm. And that's the thing too. I remember obviously like coming up on this new Wonder Years record, similar conversations where it's like, this is our 7th record. We didn't think we shouldn't have been allowed to make one. Like now what are we going to do? 7 records in kind of thing. And it was pretty much that guiding light of like, listen, there's no way a song is going to get through the 6 of you in a room and just not be a Wonder Years song. It can't happen. So if it gets through y'all and that filter, it's gonna have that. So regardless of where or how far it goes, it's gonna have that. So let that free you. And it sounds like that's kind of what happened with this track. And clearly fans love it and completely dug into it. And what a cool thing to see and having trusted that, like, to know that you have such a powerful brand that just happens, that you just let it go. It's like, it's always going to be Claudio. It's always going to be a Coheed song at the end, regardless of where you chase it. That's some serious wisdom to pass down. And it doesn't, you can't build that kind of strength overnight, but it's, from release to release, it grows, and you start picking out those points and realizing, and people on your side that are not there in every second of the writing in the studio can see that, and you can feel it as a fan of Coheed too. And I think that's why it was really powerful in this realm, right? that was also partially catalyzed in the way that it was remotely because of the timing in the pandemic. So pivoting to another release that was kind of like mid throes of the pandemic, which was the Nothing Nowhere record, Trauma Factory, that came out in the beginning of 2021. So I'm curious, and Tom and I, we were talking about this, and I'm sure plenty of art, everything shuts down, the entire industry scrambles, and then everybody's like, well, I can still make music. Mm-hmm. Oh, languishing. Do I want to? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. And riding the whole creative wave, but then also, the rest of the industry and people that are that have artists that, and had projects in the scope, right? Everybody's pivoting. So I'm curious, obviously this had a really interesting kind of creative arc to it too, the way it came up, organically and developed as an artist. But I'm curious, speak to that, and then maybe we'll go in reverse order then. What was that like releasing that record in the midst of all of this, and how did that differ from like, a non-pandemic release, and what was that like too? Because I think you can speak maybe even more so than anybody else on the creative end of stuff, of what that feels like to be like, cool, we have such a great, amazing record, but time and place and circumstance also plays in such a huge role to how it's digested, right?
Big time. Yeah, I think with that one we made most of it during the pandemic as well, mostly remote, other half with Zakk. So funny enough. But yeah, it was very much he's such a self-sufficient, I can record an entire record at home guy, which is great. So like pandemic, I don't even know if he noticed there was a pandemic for the first 6 months, to be honest, but that's just the kind of musician he is in the studio. And he came out and he's like, oh yeah, I can't go on tour. Okay. That's the difference. Right. Yeah. So yeah. And working with him for years and years and years, it was like, this record came together out of a batch of, I don't know, probably like 70 or 80 songs he had made over like an 18-month period. And he was just sending idea after idea after idea. And then as we started narrowing it down, it's like, well, is your record going to be like the old SoundCloud rap stuff? Is it going to be like this more alternative thing? Is it going to be heavy? Because you got a couple of heavy songs. Like, what is it? And he kind of like called one day, and this is what I love about him, is he's like, I want it to be all of those things. I want people to be so confused from song to song that like I can jump from genres, and that it all sounds like me, but it also like sonically and like tempo and like production is just different on every song, that like we could be on 4 or 5 different like playlists, like genres or like whatever it may be. I want to just put out the craziest record, and I have all the songs to do it. So let's pick our favorites and then let's see what it looks like. So we kept narrowing it down. And then he came out with probably like a half a record in mind. And then him and Zakk wrote songs, I think, every day for like 10 days. And every single day they would send me something like crazier than the previous, whether it be like a straight up like rap song. And then the next day was a song called Death, which is like the heaviest, darkest thing he's ever done, like a new metal thing almost at this point. And then it was like the next day was like Fake Friend, which we took to alternative radio. And it's like we had the like weirdest batch of stuff going on. But again, that was the whole point. And he's like, I want reviewers to be like, I love it all. I don't know what the fuck is happening. I don't know what this artist is doing. And he's like, I love that. I want chaos. And I was like, okay, fuck it. It's all you. You wrote it all. So let's put it out. Let's figure it out.
That's right. So there's no authenticity problem. It's like these are all songs that are coming out of your brain. So no one can be like, well, you're trying to pander to this, that. It's like, no, this is all in there. So
yeah.
Well, okay, so talk to me about the narrowing down process, because that 80s song, I mean, you heard me, I was like, both a dream and a nightmare for someone in your position to be like, great, we have so many options to choose from. We're guaranteed a winner. But at the same time, where do you start with that? Because you're not a music supervisor. You're not like, going through 100 tracks looking for something that has like pipe organ and like a Celtic like tinged theme to it. It's like you're trying to judge all the way through if something does it for you, and really rips. What is that like? Where do you start with that?
Well, if he hears this, he'll probably get mad at me because it was probably more than that. But I don't really.
It was 180, Johnny.
Yeah, I bet it was. It was something ridiculous. But I think for me, like, one, they didn't all come in at once, thankfully. But it was like, as you would write them, I mean, I still every day, the last he'll text me a song and be like, I just did this last night. What do you think? Or should I keep going? What is this to you? You know? So it's still the normal, that's what it was. So we kind of like, as those, I knew which ones stood out to me initially. I knew which ones I was like, this is fine, unless you kind of, you know, whatever, redo it. But the thing with him that I love the most is like a feeling and like a lyric. Like if there's something that he could get me to react to, I'm like, there's something in this one that I think this is really interesting. I think the chorus is really cool, but I think the bridge lyrics are really, really like gut wrenching on this one, or like the feeling I get from the weird, sad guitar with the like little like sparkly production over it. But also you're saying like, you miss being a 12-year-old kid and didn't realize how good you had it. I think everyone can relate to that. You know, I'm like, that's interesting. Keep going there. So it's like, again, from a fan, and the way it, like that I've always made records is just from a fan perspective. Like I don't know any other ways. I'm not technically sound. I couldn't tell you like any like notes or anything. I just truly tell you like what makes me feel something. Even like with like mixed notes, I fucking hate mixed notes. I don't like, it's not my, I don't think a mixed note will ever break a song. And I want to go on record of saying that. So everyone always wants to give their 2 cents. And I'm like, you're the artist. Do you like it? Fuck yeah, let's run it.
You know what?
Hell yeah.
Dude.
Johnny, we're getting you a t-shirt.
Yeah, that's your brand, dude. That's on brand. Signed, sealed, delivered. Also, there's competing versions of me. There's guitar player me that says you're 100% wrong. That 0.2 dB of the guitar up will make this a hit. But then there's also someone on the other side that fields mixed notes like that and production notes that says, dude, we already got this thing and it was a shoe-in before I even dropped it in the mix template. Stop. So, and I know both of those sides. So I think I am ultimately inclined to agree, but you also have to like chase and appease the like,
dude,
but, you know,
everyone's got to have their ownership and their fingerprint on it. I get it. But yes, when I get notes from multiple members of bands and their notes are only about their instrument, I'm like, fuck. I'm like, we are not even listening to the song together. You are listening to one thing.
Dude, I joked about instating a rule where it's just like, you can only make mixed notes that aren't applicable to your part in that moment.
That's it. Because everyone just wants their thing louder. So you go, okay, we all got louder.
Somebody else has to say that your guitar is too quiet. Taking a minute here to shout out our good friends at Sheet Happens Publishing, back with us again for season 3. They are a company that works directly with artists to create accurate and immersive tab books, vinyl, and other merch that allows fans to get one step closer to perfecting the soundtrack of their lives. As many of you may know, I had the pleasure of working side by side with them to put together a book for my band, The Wonder Years, and believe me, they are incredibly thorough and always dedicated to artist-approved accuracy in every one of their books. Every tab book comes with the accompanying guitar profiles, which allow you to jump right into playing along with all of your favorite tracks. So all you need to do is head over to sheethappenspublishing.com to check out everything they have to offer, and be sure to enter the code TRP15 at checkout for 15% off your first purchase. Or you can find the link in our show notes, and again, that's promo code TRP15. I'm actually curious too to like slow down real quick, because that obviously we touch on the mix process here in a lot of episodes too. What does that look like from your standpoint? Because you mentioned getting mix notes and you kind of being the hub that they run through. I didn't realize that that's necessarily how it worked. I mean, sometimes obviously on copy, but what does that generally, especially maybe for this record specifically, look like?
Well, this record specifically, luckily there's only one person in the group, so it's pretty easy. So you're like, hey, talk to Zakk, you figure it out, so that's cool. But like, again, I think it's more organizational when there's multiple members, especially 6 would be and the thing that I hate is when it's not organized and someone's not like, hey, everything comes to me both ways. Because when someone texts the mixer and then they get it back and you're like, well, I didn't even give my notes on the previous version yet. And now my notes don't make sense. And it's like, you kind of all go at once, right? And if I get notes from a band that has multiple members that are giving notes and they're not even on the same page, I'm like, you two have conflicting notes. Like, where are we going here? You guys got to talk that out before I even go and waste someone's time. And when I say I don't have mixed notes, for the most part, I'm not saying because I don't give a shit. I'm saying because I'm trusting the producer, the mixer, and the artist to get it to a place to then bring to me and me be like, yo, cool. If it's like, dude, if something is blaringly like, hey, this bugs me when this is so high. Why is it so high in the mix? And they're like, oh, we think that's like a big hook of the song. And I'm like, that's my least, all I think about from then forward is why that's so loud. That's not what you want people to do in your song. And, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, it's all their call. It's the artist's song. They were the ones got to talk about it. They're the ones playing it every night. Like at the end of the day, they're king. But yeah, I think to me, it's got to be organized, because there's nothing worse than a mix engineer then calling you and be like, dude, what is happening with this record? And you're like, okay, hang on. I don't even know yet. So if it comes through me, I know the status of both sides the whole way.
That makes a whole lot of sense, honestly. And what's actually I guess the only thing taking that for anybody that's in a band or deals with this in terms of mix notes and, you know, has experienced that, I think that's a great, you know, having an intermediary sometimes is helpful. In our case, sometimes we will select like one designated member and be like, band notes come to that person. That person says, hey, organize. You said vocal up here. You said vocal down here. Are you talking about the same vocal? What, like, who's going to compromise and be like, well, I wasn't really that strong about it. And then one person was usually it was usually a much bigger issue to one of those two people. And, you know, you got to find those winners before it goes out the door. So that's rock solid. And I'm sure very effective in you keeping a good, like keeping everybody happy too. Cause on the mix engineer end, it's you're sitting back there and be like, A, I don't even know what this means. B, now I'm thinking that they hate this, and it's not true, but that confusion can really like derail that kind of inherent momentum that I'm sure someone like Zakk thrives on, you know? So yeah, well,
and you're going to ask him to be tight deadlines. So you want him to be psyched.
Right.
Totally. In regards to this Nothing Nowhere record, mix notes are easy because it's
one person,
just one. But kind of looking at the personnel, it's like in comparison with the Coheed record, it was just Zakk and Claudio. And on this record, there's a bunch of different producers. So were you kind of also like, I don't want to say wrangling, but wrangling for lack of a better word in that scenario as well?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of producers because that's the way that Joe remotely makes music. So like,
of course,
a friend of his will make a beat, send it to him, then they'll go back and forth for a minute, and then they'll take that. Then he takes that into Zakk. So by the time it gets to Zakk, it's already kind of like felt through. And maybe there's a few on there. I'd have to look song by song that like Zakk didn't produce, but he mixed or did additional production on, or just kind of helped make it cohesive, because there's a lot of songs and it'd be a lot of different producers would definitely make that thing sound different qualities.
Of course.
It was more wrangling the productions than it was the mixes at that point for this kind of project where it was, again, pieced together over 18 months remotely. So it wasn't like 3 weeks in the studio and then what you have is what you have. It was changing your mind, updating lyrics, restructuring songs. Like by the time you walked in with Zakk, it was like, just make it sound good.
Yeah. So
totally.
So in terms of talking about like different personnel and people coming in and out for tracks, obviously sometimes that's organic. Friend, he's knows this person, they're just like, yo, we should do something together, right? Like that's kind of a no-brainer sometimes. But I'm curious what your kind of 10,000 foot view looks like that from project to project, because obviously now with the digital like streaming ecosystem, I'm sure plenty of our like artist band listeners are maybe not no stranger to the idea that, hey, like having a feature on a track can be like a creative and interesting thing to throw into the mix, both sonically, stylistically, but for also like additional kind of like promotional reaches and whatever. So, but I think I have my own thoughts on this, across stuff. But I think more importantly, I'd like to hear how you see that. For example, like, Blood on this record, Kenny came on, and I'm sure there have obviously been many other tracks, some of which are organic friendships, but maybe some aren't. And I think because you see so many different pieces and are a fan of so many different bands across the ecosystem and are aware of a lot of those up and coming things. what does your role start to then look like? Maybe it's even outside this Nothing Nowhere record or that project, because he's already got a lot of people that he wants to work with and wants to bring on. What are your thoughts on that as someone who, it's like VP of A&R at a label and dealing with so many things? How does that conversation kind of start, continue, end with an artist, right?
Yeah, I think it's again unique to every different artist, every different record, song even. But yeah, with Blood, with Nothing Nowhere and Kenny Hoopla, they were talking. Like Joe's just always in the mix with everyone. He was probably the first person I know that like showed me Kenny Hoopla early on, probably before he even signed or anything. So it's like he's definitely always early with the friendships that he just always, and he's got a new song coming out in a couple of weeks with Buddy from Senses Fail. And he's like, yeah, we talked about it at a show last year and he jumped on a song. Like it's all natural for that project. But in general, yeah, there's definitely stuff that like, if I hear a song or if they're like, I want a feature on this record or whatever, like we'll put our 2 cents in or suggestions, or like, as like being around long enough, you kind of bump into enough people that it starts to feel like, oh, who'd be great on this is so-and-so, and now with the nature of, to your point, the digital stuff, like we'll do like a rehashed version of a song that's already out and throw someone on it and kind of make it another layer to what the story is within it. But yeah, I think the feature stuff is awesome. I mean, it's so fun now because it's like you can move so quickly. Like you can have someone jump on a song today and put it out next week. Like it's just so much like faster. And that's like a really fun like environment to work in, because it's like you're kind of creating these collaborations and then you watch everything grow together and both fan bases get psyched, and then they tour together. Like Nothing Nowhere's touring with Kenny Hoopla this fall. So that's going to be awesome. But that was all born out of their friendship and then doing the song together and just staying friendly for probably 2 or 3 years now, whatever it is. But yeah, I think it's a really fun tool that you guys have always done it. It is, it's like, I think there's a balance of like just wanting to hang out with your friends more and make music, and you're a fan of your friend's band. So you're like, yeah, next time you're in the studio, if you're looking, let's do it. I think it's a really fun way to just like get fan bases excited. And then even growing up through the mid 2000s, Fuel by Ramen, it's like, dude, you couldn't keep those bands off each other's records. It was like, I think we already did this feature on the last record. They're like, whatever, we're in the studio.
Whatever, he's here. It's tracked. It sounds great. I don't care. They're gonna show up side by side on the same comp anyway. It's all good.
That's it.
First of all, that's awesome. And I think a great perspective, and it is like having fun with it. And it is a cool thing. I'd love to, as we kind of transition and wrap up, because I do like when there is a lane for it to have, a sort of informative component and insights. Obviously, you've dropped a lot just, through the stories of these records. But I think this is a really cool chance. And on this topic specifically, maybe with your experiences and having seen stuff come together organically and also having kind of pitched some potential visions, there are obviously, like I mentioned, and very well, more so than I probably, because of what comes across your radar in a given week. There are a lot of young bands out there trying to navigate, how do we stream more? How do we get the visibility, cut through the noise, right? And there are lots of really good sound philosophies for doing that, and kind of whether it's looking internally at yourself as an artist and then pulling it out. A lot of good stuff, right? But in this specific case, if you had some advice for the bands, artists listening, whether they're just starting, maybe at a midpoint in their career and trying to like figure out ways, and someone comes to them and says, oh, dude, features, or like, let's collab, let's collab, right? So it's like, give some, maybe some better advice or qualify that a little bit more if you have any ways for younger bands based on what you've seen that works really well, right? Yeah,
it depends on, I guess, the goal, or I guess the immediate goal and then the long-term goal. And that's different, I think, between artists and different, especially even different regions, right? Because not everyone has like flourishing scenes or great venues, or they're in the middle of nowhere. But thankfully, the internet is vast and you can be the biggest band and no one knows where you're from. It doesn't even matter. How many times you listen to stuff on a playlist and you don't know where that band's from? It doesn't matter. It's just great music's great stuff. It travels. So for me, I think I usually boil it down to like causing a reaction. Like that's the biggest thing, is like making someone feel something when they hear it. Like what's different, why your song, your band versus the tried and true stuff that they're obsessed with. A lot of people don't listen to a lot of new music in my experiences. They listen to what they listened to in their formative years, in their teens and 20s. And I mean, they go back to the first two Taking Back Sunday records and they're just like, these are my shit. That's it. Like, you know, it's like people don't always discover and do the deep dive that super music fans do. So it's hard to like get to break through that ceiling of like, you know, your local fan base at times. So to me, it's causing reaction, finding what's special about your writing, your songs, your lyrics. What is it that's going to, like, one, stand out a little bit, and then two, it's consistency to me. Like there's no more cycles. Like you're never really off cycle, because it's just, everyone wants to know where you're at. You got to kind of overshare just to share enough at this point, in a way of like social media and whatnot, which is a whole nother 2 hours if we were going to do that. But I think it's a thing of really consistently making sure that you're doing something exciting. Like to me, I feel like I'm asleep at the wheel if I don't have my 2 or 3 next like big booming moments that I know are coming, but the fan bases don't know are coming, of each artist or each new signings that I'm working through or whatever it may be. Like I just don't feel excited unless I have like too much coming soon, right? Because if you really like, you know, you got to have something to look forward to and build. So to me, if I'm in a band, I'm talking about obviously going back to Nothing Nowhere, dude's writing tons and tons and tons of music because he's just obsessed with writing music. And just that's a really important key factor. I think that comes across. Whereas I think a lot of artists are like, all right, I wrote 12 songs, I got a record. And then you're like, are those the 12 best songs you can write for this next entire era of this album cycle, whatever it is? And I also wouldn't get too tripped up on projects. I think a lot of artists want to be like, I want to put out an album. And you're like, do people want an album? I don't know, maybe. But why don't you just like start slow, start like song, second song, third song, have the next one ready to go at all times, you know, have acoustic versions of those songs, have your friend take the stems and do something weird to it and then release that version, and do those things to just have something to talk about that's about the band and what it's going to be, and play some shows, do the whole tried and true touring if and when gas ever becomes more reasonable to get out on the road. But I think that there's a balance of just kind of like, there's a consistency to getting people excited, because the second it gets boring, they're moving on. It's that simple for a fan. I mean, we could all say it as fans, right?
Dude, I think that's so well put. And actually, I'll kind of almost like reframing to galvanize exactly what you're saying. This kind of way, I've started gravitating towards, you know, the like verb-based idea of like, don't try and push what you are, what you did in "this is my song, this is my band" as like a fixed noun, very static in time. This is what I'm doing. This is what, you know, come along for the journey, very dynamic in that way. So it's like, what, you know, what is the verb of your project and your action? And maybe that is, they're doing all of these crazy features. I got to follow along because who knows what's going to pop up next? Like, that's insane. And sometimes thinking of it like that and doing what I mean, you know, like I'm sure a lot of your like really great, like the marketing conversations, just general project conversations are about interrupting patterns that are existing out there. Right. So and that's exactly what you're kind of saying, where it's figuring out ways to do that and continue that. That's that excitement, right? It's come into this journey because you want to follow along, especially with a younger artist. If you're developing, right? It's like, if you're Coheed,
yeah,
it's like, there's been a journey. You can read about it, like the Odyssey, you know, like, dude, what a great point. So yeah, and that's, I think, a good way of like, sure, like features, like the collabs, they fall into that interesting, you know, process and journey that you're trying to show people. It's like a lot of stuff is happening here with a lot of different artists, right? And it organically kind of bubbles up even more with that. Dude, what a great way to go out. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by, dude.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Johnny.
Yeah, thank you. No, I really appreciate it. I mean, I love obviously doing this. I love being around super creative people. It's the songs I listen to when I drive around, you know what I mean? When I'm flying across the country, whatever it is, it's like, it's super, super exciting to be able to kind of just be a part of that in the way that like I'm watching people fully realize themselves. And that's the coolest shit. So I hope everyone gets to do that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Couldn't have been said better. Well, thanks again. Be well, and we'll have to have you back for Storytime Part 2 at some point, maybe on next season.
Load me up and reach out with any questions. Obviously, whoever.
Yeah. On that note as well, you do a couple really have a couple like really great like playlist things. Where can people just like follow along to like what you do, or like with the label with those bands, right? Because obviously we'll link to all of that in the notes, as they say. You know?
Cool. Yeah. Everything, mostly the more active one is obviously like Instagram, because it's just easy to throw stuff up. But yeah, I mean, any of the labels, awesome. Elektra Records, Fubarama, Roadrunner, DTA Records, Public Consumption, Double Black Records. There's a bunch of stuff. We're just kind of all over the place putting out a bunch of music. So flow through.
Love that.
Yeah. So go follow the labels and see what they're doing. And that'll, honestly, this is why I love it. The more projects that you follow and come across the radar of, I feel like the more it supercharges you as a creative to go do your own thing, right? Go give you ideas you can run with. So that's great. Until next time, thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
I think this interview was a really great opportunity for us to do some demystifying of what it means to work in an A&R capacity for a label or for any music company in general. And I think the way Johnny thinks about artists and lets his inner fan guide some of those decisions are the kind of things that allow him to make bold choices and continue reinventing what that title means, and ultimately brought him to a place where he could approach both a producer like Zakk and a band like Coheed and say, hey, let's try this out. Just trust me, see what can happen. And sometimes you need that figure that can sew that line of creativity together between two individuals that otherwise might be in a position where they feel very far away from each other. And I think his deep-rooted knowledge of the band as a fan of them is what gave them the comfort to trust him with that recommendation, and ultimately got them on the phone and got them passing tracks back and forth to see where things could go with Zakk. And I think the results of the album speak for themselves. And finally, speaking of friendly recommendations and music fandom, I highly suggest you go check out a show called If You're Listening, which you can find wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. Show host Heather Hines listened to all the hits when she was in high school, while her co-host Ramsey was occupied watching Star Wars frame by frame. And so each week, Heather and a guest introduce him to music that spoke to them when they were growing up, and together they find out which albums are still great and which ones their parents may have been right about the entire time and should be forgotten. There are a lot of episodes to choose from, so if you need one to dive in on, you can check out the episode that aired on June 7th back in 2021. It features myself as a guest, and we talk about Sugar Ray's album Floored and whether that stands up to the test of time or not. So check out the link in our show notes, and as always, thanks for joining us on
The Record Process.